Today we're going to make this fun pillow finish. Grab your Be Mine chart, linked below, and let's get started. To get started, you'll need your completed stitched pattern. This is the Be Mine chart. It's available in my Etsy shop. I will link that below. This is stitched on 14 count Aida. I'm going to use some of this Fusible Sheerweight interfacing by Pellon on the back of that to give it a little more stability and to cover some of the holes. I'll be using a piece of fabric from my scrap pile. This is from the Mint for You collection, Riley Blake Designs. On the back, I have a piece of Harmony Wideback by Pat Sloan. It's a nice yellow with flowers. I'm going to go ahead and use that. We're also going to use some felt. Mine are cut into hearts. I'll show you how I did that. I'll be using this trim. This is the Riley Blake large Beehive color trim, otherwise known as rickrack. And then you'll need things like pins, rotary cutter or scissors, a ruler, and some fluff. Let's get started. The first thing I did was prepare the back of my piece. Since this is stitched on 14 count Aida, the holes are a little bit bigger. I use this Pellon Fusible Sheerweight interfacing. I'll show you what that looks like. It's very thin, it's very lightweight. One side you can feel is kind of nubby. This is the side that don't touch your fabric, and then you iron on that side. So when you put it on, you put the nubby side down and then iron. Mine's already ironed on. You can see that. I gave myself a margin around the piece. And I prepared my fabric hearts for the back. I used this Accuquilt Heart Die. You can cut your own hearts, you can cut any kind of shape you want. I just happen to have this, so I decided to use it for this project. I used felt scraps, and before I used the die to cut, I put the same interfacing on the back just to give the felt a little bit of stability. To give you an idea of the layout for this piece, I'm going to be putting the fabric on the bottom, and then we'll have our trim. The first thing you want to do is decide how much space you want around your piece. This is a large trim. It's about 1/2 inch, so I want to make sure that I don't bump it too close to my stitching and cover my stitching. I want to give myself some space for that. Let's go ahead and lay that down and let's look. You can eyeball it. Now what I am going to do is turn this to face me. I'm standing over here. So this is going to go sideways for you for a moment. That way I can kind of see where I want to put it. I like it right there. You can use a pen if you want to mark it. I'm just going to put a pin. Let's see. It's a little too high. All right, I want it right there. Let's go ahead and pin that down. And you can make sure it's straight. It's kind of easy with Aida. I can follow the line created by the squares on the Aida. And then this I'm going to do on my sewing machine. Just want to make sure it's straight. And since it's going to be a pillow, if it ends up being a little crooked, honestly, it won't matter. You're going to stuff it and it'll have some give in it anyway. Alright, that looks straight to me. What I'm going to do is take this to my sewing machine. I'm going to stitch this down. I'm going to use a longer stitch length in case it's crooked. That way I can pull it out without really needing to get out of the seam ripper. I'm not going to stitch in the middle because that's where I'm going to place my fabric. I'm going to stitch right about here and stitch these little bottom mountains, whatever you want to call them, stitch these down. Let's go ahead and go over to the sewing machine. I'm at my sewing machine. This is a Juki TL 2020 PE if you're interested. Straight stitch machine. I have the stitch length set at 4, so it's going to give me a longer basting stitch. You don't need to tack down because some of this is going to be trimmed off. Let's go ahead and stitch that. You can see I'm just catching the bottom edge of this. I'd actually like to get it a little bit further up. I'm just going to pull my needle up, slide my fabric a bit, go back down, and I'm going to pull that pin out so I don't sew over it. If you don't want to sew, you could hot glue this or fabric glue it. There's no reason why not. We are going to need the sewing machine later though, unless you like to hand stitch. Here we go. Get that pin. I'm double checking to make sure I've got this straight. Looks like I'm a little crooked. Let me go ahead and fix that. What I'm doing is matching the peak of the trim with the same row on the Ada. I could have drawn a line. I didn't want to. Here we go. One thing about crafts is you need to make sure you enjoy it. That's the thread cutter. Don't get hung up on perfection. You'll just make yourself nuts. Let me show you. That's all stitched down. We're going to go back to the table. Here's the piece after stitching down the vintage trim, or rickrack, whatever you'd like to call it. Now we're going to put on our fabric. If you hear jingling, there's a couple of dogs over that way. They're jostling for the best spot in the dog bed. We're going to want to do this right side down. Make sure you've got a nice clean edge. This is a scrap fabric, so I've already cut this and it does have a nice clean edge. And we'll go ahead and place this on the trim. This is going to go right sides together, so stitching up, fabric print down. Going to want to lay that right in the middle of that trim. Just like that. Now you can see, I don't know if it shows on the camera, but I used white thread. The basting line is down here, closer to the bottom. So I want to make sure that I'm either on the basting line or a little bit above it. Let's go ahead and try and get that down the center. That looks good. Looks like I might be a little bit off right here when I stitched it down, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and leave that. It'll be fine. I am going to pin this before I take it over to my sewing machine. If you don't want to pin, you don't have to. I'm going to just add a few pins to help keep it in place. You can see that I pin things. I had a close encounter with a pin earlier this morning, of course. I usually don't stick myself, but today I did. And it was a big one. It was a big quilting pin. That kind of hurt. Be careful with your pins. That should do it. I'm going to go ahead and take this to the sewing machine. Let's move the camera. We're back at the sewing machine. I went ahead and inched my fabric down a little bit further so the fabric edge matches that basting line. That way it's easier for me with my presser foot here. The presser foot is actually going to go right along the edge of this line. This is a 1/4 inch foot. There's no guide on this one. I'll use the one with the guide later. I'm back at a stitch length of 2. Let's go ahead and stitch this down. Let's take it back to the table. We're back at the table. Here's where we have it stitched down. Let's go ahead and flip it, see how we did. Pretty good. That looks good, I like that. It's a little tight over here, but that's going to get cut off. I'm going to take this over to the ironing board. I'm going to go ahead and press that down so it'll show a little bit better. Be right back. Here it is after pressing. That shows pretty good. If you want more of this to show when you stitch your fabric on, just stitch it a little bit lower. The next thing we are going to do is trim off the excess all the way around. I'm going to give myself on the sides maybe about an inch. Let's see what an inch looks like. Yeah, I'll give it an inch. I'm going to line it up with the very top of the stitching. And I want to make sure it's straight. I need to bend down a little bit. I've got the camera kind of up high so I can stand over it. Always close your rotary cutter when not in use, and always be careful that your fingers are not near the edges. Let's go ahead and cut that. And I'm going to do the same on the sides here. I'm going to give myself an inch. So that's going to take off this part that's a little bit, we'll call it wonky. Lining up my 1-inch line with my stitches. Make sure this goes all the way to the end of my fabric. Okay, I'm going to save that for sure. That's a nice big piece of fabric. And again, line up your ruler. Lining up my 1 inch. Now I can also line it up across the top to make sure it's straight. That looks good. There we go. One side kind of looks bigger than the other. Let's see what I did. 1 inch. It may just be the way that I'm standing. This side is a hair more than an inch. I don't know if that's what I'm seeing or not. Let's go back. Yeah, that's it. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. It's probably a 1/16 of an inch bigger than the other side. Oops, sorry, bumped the camera. I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, I can barely feel it. I'll go ahead and even it out just because. Watch that finger. See? It was just a little bit off. Here's where we are right now. Then you need to decide how long do you want your pillow. I think I'm going to make the fabric proportional to the top of the stitching to the seam line. Let's go ahead and measure that. Get some fuzz on there. So I'm going to measure right from there. It's almost 4 inches. The ruler has a little line right there, so it's the first little line before the 4. So that is, I'm going to go ahead and slide this up here. I've got lines on my cutting mat. I'm going to go ahead and line up the ruler line with the line on the cutting mat, so I'll have to get another ruler. So same thing. Let's make sure. I'm looking to line it up with this line right there. That's where I want it. You can also eyeball it. You don't have to get all nuts over it. It's a pillow. It'll look fine. If you've watched my floss tube or tutorials, you know my philosophy on that. Now we do have a little bit extra hanging out here. Let's get rid of that. It'll just make the pillow softer. If you're using like a linen or a Lugana and it's not as crunchy as Ada, you could leave it if you want. It doesn't matter, it's going to be on the inside. There we go. Here's my piece. Now we're going to measure our backing. There's a couple ways you could do that. It's going to have to go that way. Some people like to cut it larger I'm actually going to keep this part because it has that selvage, so I remember what fabric line that is. I'll use this part. And I will rough cut it. I'm going to rough cut it before I trim it down. If you want, at this point, you can certainly stitch right sides together. Make sure your right sides are together. That would be why I don't have a career singing. Okay, right side together, right sides together. I'm going to make this even, and then I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot that has a guide on my machine. So I'm going to just feel for the edge of that. Make sure I don't cut any extra off. If I do, it's not a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in here. Grab my pins. That way it doesn't move when I turn it to cut. That's part of the reason why I'm using this skinny ruler. See the pin? If I use my bigger rulers, the ones that are kind of wider, it sits on the pin. Let's go ahead and I'm going to line up the line of my ruler with the top because the top is nice and even. Then you can feel where your fabric is. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and cut that off. I'm going to add some pins. Again, sorry for the band-aid. I was really irritated when I did that this morning. I'm going to turn that. Oh, see, that pin's kind of in the way. We'll just pull that one out. That's fine. Again, I'm going to line up the top, make sure it's even. I'm looking for my fabric edge. And the last side. Now I have to move that pin. It's all right. Can feel it. Line up. Make sure I'm even. Like I did cut a little of my Ada off there. I'm going to double check. I'll line up here. Make sure I'm even across the top. Stand on my tippy toes so I can be over the camera. Yeah, looks like I was a little bit off there. Just like the tiniest bit. There it goes. I'm going to go ahead and double check. Oops, I want the one. My measurements here. It still looks good. It's still acceptable. Let's put some more pins in. Again, if you don't want a pin, you don't have to. You can also use those, I think they call them Wonder Clips, those plastic squeezy clips. And I'm just going to double check and make sure my right sides are together, which they are. Let's take this over to the sewing machine. I took off this foot. This one doesn't have a guide, and I put on this foot. It's got a 1/4 inch guide on it, just for accuracy. I'm going to start on the bottom. I have something here propping up the camera, so I'm going to have to fold this. I hope that doesn't, no, it doesn't get in the way. Okay. And we're going to sew all the way around. Lift your foot, turn. I'm a little past, So I'm going to go ahead and slide that over, raise my needle. This is a very fast sewing machine, but I hardly ever go as fast as it can. I find that I make mistakes if I try to go too quickly. Probably also jiggles the camera when I go faster. Ooh, I almost got that one just right. There we go. I got a little bit of the fabric pucker here. Rather than get a fold in my finished product, what I'm going to do is, of course, see, now I back tacked it, so I have a couple extra threads to pull. I went ahead and pulled just a bit of that. So what we're going to do is run this all the way to the end. I'm going to cut it, and then I'm going to go back and get this little section. There we go. Now we're good. See? It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. It'll look good in the end. Now our corners are real nice. What you can do at this point, if you like, is trim off the tips to help reduce the bulk when you're turning your pillow right side out. Don't cut your stitches. Don't cut your fingers. So you'll go around. Let me cut this over the trash can. Hang on. There we go. And trim them all like that. I'm going to do that and we'll go back to the table. We're back at the table. Everything is stitched together. We're going to be putting a hole on this side, not on the side with your stitching. No, 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 no. The back side. What you want to do is pinch up the fabric. Make sure you're pulling away your stitching. And we need to cut a hole that'll be big enough to get your hands in there and flip it inside out and put the stuffing in. Would be helpful if I had scissors next to me. Let me grab some scissors. Sharp scissors. I'm going to go ahead and set it down, kind of. Need to make sure that, just double checking. I've got it pinched up. I'm trying to figure out how to do this so you can see it best. I'm going to cut like that. Let's see how big that is. Not quite big enough, but what I do want to do, I want to make this easy for myself. You can always cut it bigger. So if it ends up not being big enough, you can always cut more. So you can kind of see how I cut a little cross on the back there. Let's see if that'll work. That might, I know I can turn the fabric through there, but 8 is pretty stiff. I may end up needing to, I need to make that a little bigger. I can already tell I can't flip the 8 through there. So what I'm going to do is be really careful. Lift up. Make sure I'm not cutting my back piece. I'm just going to add a little bit to all the sides here. Again, make sure you're not cutting your stitching. And when I say a little bit, I'm talking like 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, little bit. This should work. Let's go ahead and turn it inside out. We'll do the easy part first. The fabric, and then we're going to work with turning the Ada. be patient with yourself. Don't necessarily try to shove it all through at the same time. Here it comes. There's that corner. And then let's get these other corners. Almost. Let's get that corner. Okay, now we're all right side out. What I'm going to do is get a tool to help poke out these corners. I don't know, if you have really long fingernails, you can probably do that, but I don't. So let's get something to help poke out the corners. This is what they call a purple Thang, Thang. It's got this curved end here. I'm going to use that. You can also use the little square end. Let's use the little curved end. All right, one. This one I need to get in there a little bit more. There's lots of different tools you can use for turning things inside out. In fact, I have several. This is just the first one that I grabbed. I even have one that many years ago my grandpa made for my grandmother. He would die cut metal tools as part of his job. He was a machinist. These little ends. I'll go ahead and cut this out so you don't have to watch the whole thing. Here's the piece of metal that my grandfather made. So you could use this too to pop the corners out. This is that turner that my grandfather made many years ago. So you can use that to push out the corners as well. All my corners are turned. I'm going to take it to the iron and give it a press. I'll be right back. Here we are. It's all pressed. Looks good. Now we need to stuff it. Got some polyfill here. You want to use smaller pieces. You'll get better results than trying to stuff it all at once with a big piece. It won't lay very nice. So you just want to fill it however full you want it. Keep in mind, if you make it really full, it'll be really puffy. And it might distort your stitching just a bit. Kind of look for, like I can see there's a flat spot right there. Fill in your flat spots, stay in there. Alright, edit some of this out because it's boring. You have a couple of options for the back. If you want, you can certainly just stitch that up. We're going to cover those openings here with the patches that I made. I've got the black one and the mustard one. That looks nice. You can use embroidery floss and hand stitch it down, thread and hand stitch it down. I'm using the glue gun. We're going to get it done. Got my little tray that it sits on, my little paper plate. I like the hearts kind of off center versus, you could line them up. That looks nice. But it looks nice kind of a little wonky. Let's put it back on the back. That way it doesn't look too perfect. I'm going to go ahead and glue this one down first. Don't burn your fingers. This is a Surebonder high temp glue gun. They are not joking. It's very, very hot. I have some silicone finger coverings that I usually use, but this is pretty thick, so I can push down on that. Edge. Oops, see, I just got a little glue on my finger. That's pretty toasty. Watch for glue strings. Make sure it's down enough to your liking. You know, it's not like you're going to have a pillow fight with this. It's probably going to go in a dough bowl or on a shelf. Oh, I totally just smeared that glue. Let's fix that. That's because of stupid Band-Aid. It's going to go right here. Don't glue your fingers. Wow, there's smoke coming off this thing. It's so hot. I get glue string stuck on me. That. There we go. That looks good. Let's go ahead and put that on. A little bit of glue coming out the sides. Again, you know, it's a glue gun. When it completely cools, even before it completely cools, you can kind of pull the strings off. Just want to make sure you're secure so your pillow doesn't pop open. I'm going to put a little more right there. A little bit right there. That looks good. You have your finished pillow ready to display. Make sure to pick up your Be Mine pattern in my Etsy shop. I'll link it below in the descriptions. Here's the front. And there's the back. Fun, easy, stitched pillow finish. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.